What happens when country music's biggest star walks into The View expecting a friendly chat about his new album, only to find himself ambushed by a panel determined to make him pay for his past comments? You won't believe what unfolds when Blake Shelton sits down with Whoopi Goldberg and the ladies of The View in what quickly becomes one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode started innocently enough. Blake Shelton strolled onto The View set with his signature cowboy swagger, flashing that $1 million smile as he settled into the guest chair. The audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the country superstar, who'd been making headlines with his latest album and recent return to touring. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting at the head of the table with her arms crossed, offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Something was already brewing beneath the surface. "Blake Shelton, welcome to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying an edge that immediately set the tone. "We're so glad you could join us today to talk about your new music and, well, a few other things that have been on our minds." Blake shifted slightly in his chair, his media-trained instincts picking up on the subtle warning in her words. "Thanks for having me, ladies. Always a pleasure to be here with y'all." Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Is it though, Blake? Because we've been doing some digging, and frankly, some of the things you've said in the past have us questioning whether you really understand the platform you have and the responsibility that comes with it." The country star's smile faltered just a fraction. "I'm sorry. What exactly are we talking about here? I thought I was coming on to discuss my album and maybe share some stories from the road." Sarah Haynes jumped in, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Oh, we'll get to your music, Blake, but first we need to address the elephant in the room. Your comments about small-town values and traditional America. Do you realize how those words sound to people who don't fit into your narrow definition of what America should be?" Blake's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Look, I've always been proud of where I come from. Small-town Oklahoma shaped who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for celebrating that. I've never said anything against anyone else or their way of life." Whoopi's eyes flashed dangerously. "Haven't you, though? Because when you talk about real America and traditional values, you're implying that other ways of life, other families, other communities somehow don't measure up. You're dog-whistling, Blake, and we all know it." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Blake sat up straighter, his Oklahoma drawl becoming more pronounced as his defenses kicked in. "Now, hold on just a minute, Whoopi. I've never used those exact words, and I sure as hell have never dog-whistled anything. I support all Americans, regardless of who they are or where they come from. My music, my message, it's about bringing people together, not dividing them." Sunny Hostin, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with a predatory gleam in her eyes. "But Blake, let's talk specifics. Your song, God's Country, contains lyrics that many interpret as exclusionary. When you sing about the way things used to be, what exactly are you referring to? Because, to a lot of people, that sounds like nostalgia for a time when certain groups of Americans didn't have the same rights they do today." Blake's face reddened, his famous temper starting to bubble to the surface. "You're twisting my words and my music into something they're not. God's Country is about appreciating the natural beauty of rural America and the values I was raised with: hard work, faith, and taking care of your neighbors. It's got nothing to do with exclusion or going backward on anybody's rights." The audience, sensing the growing hostility, had gone eerily quiet. Blake looked around the table, realizing he was completely outnumbered and that this wasn't going to be the promotional appearance he'd signed up for. His publicist, visible in his peripheral vision, was making frantic gestures from the wings. Joy Behar wasn't finished. "Blake, you can't be that naive. When public figures like yourself use coded language about traditional values and the way things used to be, you know exactly what audience you're speaking to. And frankly, some of us find it deeply troubling." "Coded language?" Blake's voice rose an octave. "Are you kidding me right now? I'm a country music singer from Oklahoma. not a politician running for office. I write songs about my life, my experiences, and yeah, sometimes I get nostalgic about simpler times. That doesn't make me some kind of extremist." Whoopi leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the moment. "Blake, the problem is that you have millions of followers who hang on your every word. When you romanticize simpler times, you're essentially telling them that things were better when women couldn't vote, when segregation was legal, when LGBTQ+ Americans had to hide who they were. Is that really the message you want to send?" Blake's hands clenched into fists on the table. "That is absolutely not what I'm saying, and you damn well know it. You're putting words in my mouth and ideas in my head that have never been there. This is exactly the kind of divisive garbage that's tearing this country apart." The panel exchanged knowing glances, as if they'd been expecting exactly this reaction. Sarah Haynes jumped back into the fray with renewed vigor. "See, there it is. The moment we challenge you on your messaging, you get defensive and start attacking us. Maybe that tells us everything we need to know about your true feelings." But Blake wasn't backing down anymore. The trap had been sprung, but he was determined to fight his way out. "You know what?" Blake's voice cut through the studio like a knife, his Oklahoma accent thickening with each word. "I came here thinking we were going to have a real conversation, but this is nothing but a hit job. Y'all invited me on this show just so you could tear me down on national television." Whoopi's eyebrows shot up, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to genuine surprise at his pushback. "A hit job? Blake, we're asking you legitimate questions about your public statements. If you can't handle being held accountable for your words, maybe you shouldn't be making them." The country star leaned forward, his blue eyes blazing with indignation. "Accountable? For what? For being proud of where I come from? For writing songs that celebrate rural America? Last time I checked, that wasn't a crime in this country." Joy Behar let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, Blake, don't play the victim here. You know exactly what you're doing when you perform at certain venues, when you align yourself with certain causes. Your fan base isn't exactly known for their progressive values." Blake's jaw dropped. "Are you seriously sitting there judging my fans? These are hard-working Americans, farmers, factory workers, teachers, veterans, and you're writing them off because they don't live in New York or Los Angeles?" The tension was reaching a boiling point. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming television gold. The producers behind the cameras were frantically gesturing, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Sonny Hostin sensed blood in the water and moved in for another attack. "Blake, let's talk about your association with certain political figures. Your appearances at rallies, your social media likes and shares. You can't pretend to be apolitical when your digital footprint tells a very different story." Blake's face went from red to purple. "My social media? Are you stalking my social media now? What's next? Are you going to go through my grocery receipts to see what kind of bread I buy?" Sarah Haynes wasn't deterred. When you're a public figure with millions of followers, your social media matters. And when you like posts that promote divisive rhetoric, when you share content that marginalizes entire communities, you're using your platform to spread harmful messages. Show me one post, just one, where I marginalized anybody," Blake demanded, his voice rising to match the intensity of the moment. "I dare you to find a single instance where I've attacked any community or group of people." Whoopi shuffled through some papers on the desk, clearly prepared for this moment. "How about your retweet of that article questioning climate change policies? Or your endorsement of that congressional candidate who opposed marriage equality? Or what about that hunting photo with the caption about real men providing for their families?" Blake stood up partially from his chair, his hands planted firmly on the table. "That hunting photo was about conservation and feeding my family with meat I harvested myself. And I'm sorry, but last I checked, Americans are still allowed to have different opinions about policy without being branded as monsters." The audience gasped at his aggressive posture. Security guards near the set took a step closer, ready to intervene if things escalated further. Blake's publicist was now frantically waving from the wings, clearly wanting him to walk away before this got any worse. Joy Behar pressed on, undeterred by his display of anger. Blake, you can't separate yourself from the consequences of your choices. When you perform at venues that exclude certain groups, when you associate with figures who promote discrimination, you're making a statement whether you admit it or not. What venues? Blake demanded. Name one venue I've played that excludes anybody based on who they are. Sarah Haynes jumped in with ammunition ready. How about that private event you performed at last year? The one hosted by that organization with ties to anti-immigration groups? Blake's eyes widened with genuine shock. Are you talking about the charity event for veteran families? That's what you're calling anti-immigration? A fundraiser for soldiers who serve this country? Whoopi leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. Blake, you're either incredibly naive or deliberately obtuse. The organization that hosted that event has well-documented connections to groups that promote harmful policies toward immigrant communities. So, now helping veterans makes me anti-immigrant. Blake's voice cracked with disbelief. This is insane. You're connecting dots that don't exist to create a narrative that fits your agenda. Sonny Hostin wasn't finished. Your silence speaks volumes too, Blake. When issues affecting marginalized communities arise, where's your voice? When hate crimes spike, when voting rights are under attack, when women's reproductive rights are threatened, where's Blake Shelton's voice then? Blake ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated beyond measure. I'm a country music singer, not a political activist. I entertain people. I write songs. I try to bring joy into people's lives through music. When did that become not enough? When you decided to use your platform to subtly promote certain ideologies, Joy shot back. You can't have it both ways, Blake. You can't court controversy with your messaging and then claim to be just an entertainer when called out. The confrontation was spiraling completely out of control now. Blake's face was flushed with anger and frustration, while the panel sensed they had him exactly where they wanted him. The audience was riveted, watching what felt like a public execution disguised as an interview. You want to know what I really think? Blake's voice was shaking now. Whether from rage or emotion was unclear. I think you've already made up your minds about who I am based on stereotypes and assumptions. You see a guy from Oklahoma who sings country music, and you immediately assume I'm some kind of bigot. Whoopi's response was swift and cutting. We're not assuming anything, Blake. We're responding to your actual words and actions. And right now, your reaction to being questioned is telling us everything we need to know about your character. But what happened next would shock everyone in that studio. Blake Shelton slowly stood up from his chair, his full 6'5" frame towering over the panel. But instead of the explosion of anger everyone expected, his voice became deadly calm, carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made the entire studio fall silent. You know what, ladies? Blake said, his tone so measured it was almost whisper. Quiet. I've sat here for the last 20 minutes listening to you tear apart everything I stand for, everything I believe in, and everyone I care about. And I've tried to be respectful because that's how I was raised. Whoopi opened her mouth to interrupt, but Blake held up a hand that commanded absolute silence. No, I'm talking now. You've had your turn. His eyes swept across each host, one by one. You want to know what I really think? I think you're exactly what's wrong with this country right now. You sit up here in your ivory tower, looking down on people you've never met, in places you've never been, making judgments about lives you've never lived. The audience was completely transfixed. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away from what was becoming a moment of television history. Blake's voice began to rise, but with controlled power rather than unhinged rage. You talk about my fans like they're second-class citizens because they work with their hands instead of sitting behind desks in Manhattan. You mock their values, their faith, their way of life, and then you have the audacity to call me divisive? Joy Behar tried to interject. Blake, that's not what we... Don't you dare, Blake cut her off, his finger pointing directly at her. Don't you dare try to walk this back now. You spent the last half hour systematically attacking everything about me based on assumptions and twisted interpretations of my words. You didn't come here for a conversation. You came here for a public lynching. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We're just trying to hold you accountable. Accountable for what? Blake's voice boomed through the studio. For loving my country? For being proud of small-town America? For writing songs that celebrate the people who grow your food, build your houses, and fight your wars? Sonny Hostin attempted to regain control. Blake, your messaging has real-world consequences. My messaging? Blake laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. Let's talk about your messaging. You sit here every day, 5 days a week, telling millions of Americans that their beliefs are wrong, their values are outdated, and their way of life is somehow inferior to yours. You want to talk about consequences? The panel exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't going according to their script. Blake was supposed to either break down or storm off in anger, not deliver a calculated dismantling of their entire premise. You know what the real tragedy is? Blake continued, his voice now carrying a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. I actually came here today hoping we could find some common ground. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a real conversation about music, about bringing people together, about healing some of the divisions in this country. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it sounded smaller than usual. Blake, we're not trying to divide. Yes, you are, he interrupted, his tone matter of fact. That's exactly what you're doing. You've built your entire careers on division, on conflict, on making people choose sides. You don't want unity, because unity doesn't get ratings. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake looked around the studio, taking in the stunned faces of the hosts, the riveted audience, the frozen production crew. Here's what I know about my fans, Blake said, his voice returning to that dangerously quiet tone. They're teachers who work second jobs to support their families. They're nurses who worked through the pandemic when everyone else stayed home. They're mechanics and farmers and factory workers and small business owners who keep this country running while you sit up here judging them. He paused, letting that sink in before delivering his final blow. And you know what else? They're black and white and Hispanic and Native American. They're gay and straight. They're young and old. They're Democrats and Republicans and independents. Because good music, real music, doesn't see color or party lines. It sees the human heart. Joy Behar made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Blake, if that's true, then why won't you speak out against... Against what? Blake's voice rose to fill every corner of the studio. Against the straw man arguments you've created? Against positions I've never taken? Against words I've never spoken? You want me to apologize for things I haven't done to people I haven't hurt? He began gathering the small mic pack from his shirt, his movements deliberate and final. I'll tell you what I won't apologize for. I won't apologize for loving America. All of it, including the parts you seem to despise. I won't apologize for believing in faith, family, and hard work. And I sure as hell won't apologize for making music that celebrates the backbone of this nation. Whoopi made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Blake, we're not asking you to apologize for... Yes, you are, Blake said, removing his microphone completely. That's exactly what this whole ambush was designed to do. Get me to grovel, to denounce my own beliefs, to throw my fans under the bus, to appease your worldview. He placed the microphone on the table with a finality that echoed through the studio. But here's the thing about people from small-town Oklahoma, Blake said, straightening to his full height. We don't back down when we know we're right. We don't apologize for being who we are. And we don't let bullies push us around, no matter how big their platform is. The audience erupted. Some were applauding, others were shouting, but all were on their feet. The panel sat in stunned silence, completely unprepared for this turn of events. Blake looked directly into the camera, speaking past the hosts to the viewers at home. To everyone watching who's ever felt looked down on, who's ever been told their values don't matter, who's ever been made to feel ashamed of where they come from, don't let anyone convince you that you're less than. Your voice matters. Your life matters. Your story matters. He turned back to the panel one final time. And to you, ladies. I hope someday you figure out that the real enemy isn't people who think differently than you do. The real enemy is the hatred and division you're spreading every single day. Without another word, Blake Shelton walked off the View set, leaving behind a panel of speechless hosts, a studio full of chaos, and a television moment that would be talked about for years to come. The country music superstar had turned their trap into his triumph, and everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary.